Good morning and welcome to our community affairs program that we call 30 Minutes. Today we bring you an amazing story from Carole Ward, who is continuing a long-standing family tradition of missionary work. She was the special guest of Mr. Bill Latimer for the Union City Rotary Club and told her story to a packed crowd. Again today, missionary Carole Ward.
Thank you, Bill. But a little bit about my background. What an honor to be here and see your faces, and maybe you relate to a few of these stories. I don't know, we have a physician in here, but my grandparents were missionaries in China. My grandfather was an orthopedic surgeon in Shanghai with the Presbyterian mission, and they served for 30 years in Shanghai area as he was teaching in the medical university there. My mother was born there in Mandarin speaking until they were taken prisoners of war. When the communism came in 1943, they were captured and thrown into prison camps where maybe you've heard Eric Liddell and Chariots of Fire, that movie. He was also in the same prison camps. He died there, as many others did. But after being months in that prison camp, their names came up as exchanged prisoners of war, with the Americans exchanging Japanese prisoners on European soil. So they were actually reunited with my grandfather, who had almost died and was taken off into another camp. They thought he was dead. So it was a reunion on the ship. A beautiful story. But years later, my folks went to the jungles of the Philippines to be Bible translators with Wycliffe. And they drop you off in the middle of the jungle and don't really tell you anything, about those people. You have jungle training, but they just say, we'll do roll call 5 a.m. and 5 p.m. on CB radios. And if you don't answer us 2 times in a row, we'll come see if you're dead or alive. And those were some of the era and time frame that Jim Elliot didn't survive in Papua New Guinea, and he was eaten by the cannibal tribe there. So we grew up as children in that village, which was a village of terrorism, with a life a little bit like Tarzan. In the jungles. I didn't have slippers till I was 12, and my dad translated, and my mom tried to keep us alive and get us educated. So that was my upbringing, and it was very precious to me. I'd never seen TV or electricity or anything. Until I came to the States as a teenager, ready to go to college. So I went through some culture shock moving to America in the 70s, to say the least. But started school, got my nursing degree, and then I went into foster care. Worked as a nurse and opened an Alzheimer's unit of my own. I bring home heroin addicts off the streets. Would rather have the hurting, the down and outers, and the broken in my home than anybody else. And so my heart went out. I prayed and prayed during those years of working in Oklahoma to be sent by God where no one else wants to go. I always thought I'd go to India. I said, if Mother Teresa's already in heaven, let me take up her mantle and keep on working in Calcutta area. And didn't know I wouldn't be in India, but I got an invitation to go to Africa. I was teaching in a Bible school campus, a campus crusade for Christ, about 150 students for a year on that invitation. Now, after that invitation finished, my year was up, I'd been hearing about war horrors, unlike anything else I'd ever heard of, in northern Uganda and South Sudan. Atrocities done by a dictator named Joseph Kony. One of the most demonic, inhumane people, according to the UN even, when they found and discovered the war of 20 years there, said this is the worst atrocity we've seen since Hitler. And he was abducting his own people, turning children into child soldiers at 8 years old, walking them up into Sudan with AK-47s and then kill or be killed. And the first thing they had to do was come back and kill their own parents to desensitize them to death. So these kids were horrible victims. Some of them work for me today, and they were in the bush for 20 years, killing or be killed. When I heard of these atrocities, I thought, is anybody still alive up there? I'd ask the students who would be weeping as they told me story after story of people being chopped to pieces and the eyes and the mouth being cut out, burned alive in the houses, and so on and so forth. And I said, nobody's there helping? They said, no, the world has forgotten us. When my year was over, I said, I'm going north. No organization would cover me. No one would send me. They laughed at me. Why, to come home in a body bag? We're not going to have your blood on our hands. And I got all kinds of answers. But I thought, I can't find in my own faith, and I can't find in the Bible, where fear ever kept the church from growing. So I began to pray, use me in life or death, Lord. If you want to use my blood to speak 1,000 sermons, but send me, and I'll never look back. I prepared to travel. My little church in Oklahoma said, we'll just pray for you, go. So I got back to Uganda, called the U.S. Embassy, and he said, that's off limits. You're not allowed to go. And I said, is that an order or is that a suggestion? And he said, well, that's a strong suggestion. And I said, there's people up there, right? 2 million plus in camps dying. About 1,000 a day are dying with starvation, diseases, cholera, TB, HIV. We had hepatitis E. I'd never heard of that. I mean, just strange things. Now I just got a message that there's an outbreak of leprosy again over there. So all kinds of things, taking 1,000 lives a day besides the massacres and murders and ambushes. And he said, it's off limits. And I said, well, for your information, I'm going. He asked me what my name was. I told him. He said, okay, I found you on the roster as a foreigner in this nation, and I'm crossing your name off. You're as good as dead. I said, thank you very much, sir. Those were very comforting words, but I said, I'll let you know when I get back. Anyway, I started off in the car by myself, and I fought fear at that time. I drove alone. No Ugandans would go with me, terrified to cross the Nile River. But I knew there were people up there that needed to be rescued and lives that needed to be touched. I didn't count my life any more dear than theirs. And so I had prayed, send me where no one wants to go. I knew this was the place. I was in the car just with me and God. And as we had a conversation driving and I was struggling with fear, he said, I never sent anybody out in fear. It'll paralyze you. He said, perfect love casts out fear. I said, just give me more love than I've ever had in my life for the people I'm going to serve. Never seen their faces. Don't know what war looks like. Even though I grew up in ISIS and terrorism, I'd never seen any fighting. We lived so much under God's protection that God would wake my dad up in a dream in the middle of the night and say, get your family out of here. The village is going to be bombed. He'd throw us in the Jeep, take off. 2 hours later, the village is bombed. And we lived like that, just escaping danger. They're looking for his head on a plate for 45 years. But I'd never seen this kind of blood and guts. I'd never been held at gunpoint. I'd never seen what I saw when I got there. The city had been a bloodbath just a year before, and the little house that I stayed in had bullet holes in the wall. I pleaded with them, can I please stay in the camps with the people? 75,000 people in one camp dying. And I said, they're crowded like animals, but I want to feel what they're feeling. And I want to be able to touch them and embrace them. And with leprosy and with skin diseases, I did just that. But they wouldn't let me sleep there. I had to stay in the town, and I opened my little house that had bullet holes and called it a house of prayer. I didn't know what other solution there would be. I didn't have any money. 2 widows said, we'll try to get you a little bit of cash. I don't even remember how they got it to me. As I put a little sign up on the front gate, house of prayer, people started pouring in every day. But God. And there is no other hope for a nation but God. We got on our knees 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the evening, 7 days a week. Held a national prayer gathering in the stadium. I don't even know where we got the money. I had to rent the stadium. 1,000 people came riding bicycles through ambushes to join that prayer meeting. And at the end of that prayer meeting, the government office called me and said, are you that crazy white lady praying in that stadium? I said, yeah, but I wasn't praying alone. I said, why? He said, the whole atmosphere over the northern region has changed. It feels like a curtain of darkness has been pulled back, and we could feel a difference. I thought, my goodness, prayer is that powerful. So that became the foundation of everything we do and still is today. Within 5 years following that, which I thought my job was done now and I'd be moving on, but no, I stayed right there in that little town. People poured into the little house saying, help me reach my people. I saw bodies cut up and mouths and faces. There wasn't any person you met that didn't have tragedy and anguish and trauma and pain in their life. The kind of trauma where one mama would say to me, they held a gun to my head as they decapitated 9 children in front of my eyes. And if I closed my eyes, they would have blown me to pieces. I had 2 more children still to feed at home that they didn't find. And I had to watch that. Another little lady, I went to hug her in the village, and she had no arms and no legs because the rebels cut you piece by piece. Just a stump. I put my arms around her, and I wept with those who had wept. And I watched hope come back in their hearts. And they would say to me, there must be a God. So why do you say that? Because you've come, and everybody else has run away. I asked that lady what happened. She said they killed my only son, and then they took off my limbs. I have nobody to fix my roof for me. I couldn't understand such pain. But I prayed and I prayed. God, if you can use me in life or use me in death, I'll never look back. For the next 5 years, I stayed, and people came and said, I want to reach my people. I want to reach my people. I started getting calls from Sudan. At that time, it was Sudan. Will you come? Will you come? And I'm thinking, how do you know who we are? Got my number. He said, I'm calling you from the top of a mountain, from the top of a mango tree. You can't call me back. There was no network, you know. I said, well, we'll come as soon as we can. I got our team together now in Uganda 5 years later, and we started going north. A different country and a different story. 62 years of civil war. Did they choose that? Not necessarily. Innocent people being victimized and blown up. When guns and bombs start falling between warring and feuding tribes, little children are run and just scatter. Some of them drown in the Nile River. Some of them get lost. Some of them are never seen again. And they were the victims of that kind of suffering. And I would think, why do these people live to kill? Why do they just want to keep killing? And I realized they've never been taught different. You and I had an opportunity to grow up in a nation where education is here, churches, Judeo-Christian values. But in Africa, they've never had a full generation like that, not in these nations. And I thought, you mean you were never taught manners? You were never taught that's, what adultery is? No, that's just polygamy. We got to have many wives, you know. You were never taught lying? Oh, no, that's survival. No concept of right and wrong. And I started realizing, well, they can't read. 95% of the people are non-literate. I was sitting with the general about 2 years after I went up to South Sudan. He had a book laying beside him on the table. And I led him to the Lord, and I was having tea with him, talking to him about his faith. And I said, what are you studying in that book? He said, I don't know, I can't read. Most of the generals I ever met couldn't read. And I thought, how did you become a general? He said, by killing so many people, fighting so many wars. And that's all he knew. I sat with Governor Malone up near Darfur. And he said, I saw the crusade you were having up here, 1 million people. I want you to come to my house for dinner. I came into his compound. There was ostriches running around. He had a long table. And he had 84 wives. And all he knew was witchcraft. And all he talked about was killing. And I heard it everywhere I went. And I thought, is there nothing else to live for here? And I realized that the root of it was no education. They had no knowledge about the Bible. They couldn't read. Education, lack of education brings in witchcraft, polygamy, poverty, tribal wars. That's all they've known to do. They've been born in blood and they die in blood. And I looked at, again, a situation worse than Uganda. And I said, is it possible to see change here. But God. We go back to the prayer closets and the national prayer gatherings and watch incredible transformation. Right after prayer, the worst dictator in Sudan was removed from office, and now we can go freely into the northern nations that were once so hostile Islamic that you were decapitated and executed if you converted from Islam to Christianity. That law has been lifted and we can go freely now. So since 2005, I've been going into South Sudan. Started moving there myself in more and more places in 2007. I went to the Murlay people. If you've ever watched BBC News and they say South Sudan is the most volatile nation in the world, it is true. So after having a talk with God about it, and I saying, I want to see this nation changed. And he said, how bad? I said, well, bad enough that I'd die for it. He said, well, go to the worst spot there is in the nation. If this nation is the most volatile nation in the world, go to the most volatile tribe. Now, I'd heard about this tribe, and I wanted to reach the Aniwak people on the mountains of South Sudan and Ethiopia. I said, well, how do you get to the Aniwak? I'd ask our guys. Oh, you have to go by foot days through the Murlay. You'll never survive. They kill everything that moves. I heard stories for years about the Murlay people. And I said, I'd study, and I go, is this really true? They shoot a bird, shoot a car, shoot a person, shoot an animal. No difference. And they just live to kill. They'll tell you that. Everybody's got AK-47s because they get them off of the bodies of the dead soldiers. So I said, I just heard again God say in my heart, do you believe me enough? After you've just prayed to see change in this nation, I said, you bet I do. He said, then go right into the thicket and the thickest darkness. I still go there today, and I go through gunfire, and I have rebels jump in the car, and I'm held at gunpoint, and the government asks us to go because of the transformation they're seeing. So I got in the car. A group of the team wanted to go with me. I said, you can go on ahead, but we're going to leave a couple days' journey between us in case there is an attack. And you can go on ahead and you start an open-air crusade and start talking to the government. We want to put in a school and other things. I'll be right behind you. And I got in the car and I'm driving myself. I've driven days and days and days across the terrain of South Sudan. And so as I'm driving with the team in the car, I had some Murlay translators in the car given to me by the government because we needed a guide and a translator. And they said, you're going through no man's land and it's open fire. And the worst kind of deaths is when you get caught in the crossfire. So we had a couple of these Murlay guys given to us by the government of South Sudan that were in the car with me. I didn't know I had the devil in the car. They were planning for my death before I would reach my destination. I didn't know that, or speaking their language, but some of the guys in our car understood enough of what they were saying. So we started driving. It was a full day to one location. We had to stop, stay overnight. My team pulls me aside and says, you've got a death threat in the front seat. And I said, well, they've been hired and paid for by the government. How are we going to ditch these guys? And they said, leave it to us. So they were waiting on my arrival. They'd already called a bunch of the Murlay killers, which they all are. And they said, when she arrives, you take her out. And they take you out for the little bit that they can confiscate from your vehicle, and then they usually light fire to it. And so my team pulled me aside and said, now we're going to let you get in the car and act like you're going to go repair it. You go around this way, and we're going to distract the guys this way. And then we'll meet up with you farther down the road. I did exactly what they told me to. And we ditched those killers. And somehow I thought they were going back to Juba. Our guys met up with me, got back in the car, and we had another 10 hours through no man's land, which is the worst place of open fire, to get to the Murlay, the main Murlay headquarters. One time I was with the Toposa people. Toposa people will rob you blind and take the shirt right off your back and say it's theirs. Wild G-string headhunters up in the mountains bordering Kenya and South Sudan and Ethiopia. And I was up there, and we were sharing audio Bibles with them. We were sharing trauma healing with them and seeing what the community needed that we could bring in, from community health to literacy to women empowerment, the things that we do as an organization. And there's 500 of us, so we're in about 6 countries, and we manage all of that from the base of Juba. But in those days I was in Toposa, and I found that the guinea worms, I know that Rotary does a lot with water, and I'm just going to say this because I'm so grateful. We're losing people with filthy water. When our guys go up into the mountains hiking 2 days through the lions and hyenas to get to unreached people groups, which we do all the time, the only thing they can find is a dirty mud puddle. And so if we don't have any life straws, they're going like this and sucking up the dirty water. Now the South Sudanese have stomachs like guts, just goats. Their stomachs like steel. And he said they'll wash off their muddy shoes in that old little swamp. After they finish cleaning their boots, they'll scoop up the water and just take a drink, and they just don't matter about anything, what they eat or drink. And so, but they don't know they got on the inside of them. That's the problem. So when I was up in the Toposa people, he said, we're losing people with paralysis to guinea worms. I said, guinea worms in your stomach causing paralysis? He said, yes, they make their way through the intestines and into the flesh, and they paralyze your arms and limbs and so on and so forth if they're long enough. I said, you mean there's no boreholes and never been any water up here? And they said, oh, some organization several years ago, way off somewhere, drilled a borehole. And I said, they're not using it? Oh, no, they think the spirits are down there, and they won't pull that water up. So every time we do something for them, we've got to follow it with education. I said, you can't just come in and put in a well. You can't even stick their finger to draw blood and see if they have malaria or HIV. They think the demon spirits are pulling their blood out. They're very superstitious, barbaric cultures there. So I said, well, we're going to train them how to use clean water, and we're going to get it for them. And we began educating them. And a few years later, guinea worms were eradicated from that place. Most of the time when we go in to see a community changed, we pick one community at a time. How do you save a nation? One life at a time, one day at a time. How do you eat an elephant? Same way. That's the only way we know to do, because there's thousands of people, and every single one of them needs transformation and help. So one day at a time, and we send out. But before we send out 500 people, we get a map out of the nation. And we say, now, where are the unreached people? Where are the warring? Where is the bloodshed? Where is the tribalism? Where are the places the government won't go? Good, let's go. And our guys go. They're the first to raise their hand. We'll go. In 18 years, almost 19 years now, we've never lost a guy on the field. And they'll face guns right in the face and talk them down. So when we say Bibles instead of bullets and disarm the hearts to disarm the guns, it's actual truth. So we would look at places where we needed to go. And when we do that, we identify a whole community to see it changed. We bring in the power of Bible school and God's Word first, and then we want to see a village changed around truth. Not deception, not lies, not tribalism, not paganism, and not all their traditions and cultures, which still involve human sacrifices and blood for blood. So we bring in transformation by the renewing of the mind, Romans 12 says, and we start somewhere. After we do some Bible school training, we include literacy, we do community health, we do trauma healing. We start, if they need a well, we'll do a well project. If they need a mobile medical clinic, we'll bring in a mobile medical clinic. If they need a youth training, in agriculture and development, we'll bring that in. Women empowerment. Women want to feed their children, educate them, and that's their biggest dream of life. They never think of anything for themselves. And so we start there and we train. And we'll give them pigs, we'll give them goats, 50 women. And they save money and they grow in their businesses. And now they're selling to other villages. And we've been doing this for about 50 or 60 villages now, changed throughout this area. I want to tell you Susan's story real quickly and then give you time for question and answer. Susan was abducted during the LRA war when she was 12 years old. She and her brother were kidnapped from their hut, and they were taken by foot to walk 2 days into Sudan to learn how to kill or be killed and given an AK-47. That was her teenage years. as a young girl. And she had to fight battles, bloody battles, and never let her machine gun down, her AK-47. She watched her brother get blown up beside her in a bloody battle. After about 10 years of this, Susan had become a war slave, human slave, and a sex slave to the soldiers, and they had wasted her body and were now going to do away with her. She had picked up enough Arabic language to hear what they were saying at night on how they're going to get rid of Susan the next day. And she prayed. She had no knowledge of God, never heard his name, nothing. But she just said, somewhere there, if there's a God, if you'll help me escape, I'll look for you. She waited till the soldiers were asleep and she took off through the jungle, barefoot. Didn't have a clue what direction she's going in. They're up in the southern part of South Sudan at that time. Dark night, running through thick jungle. There's snakes and animals of all kinds, but she comes to a river, a tributary of the Nile, full of crocodiles. They always are. We've had to do baptisms. I said 2 people in the water baptizing, 2 people looking for crocs. And sure enough, they came. We had to move down the river. So they're there. She goes, how am I going to cross this one? She gets in the water, the dark of midnight, completely immersed because she knew they'd be following her. And she leaves her face only above the surface of the water and slides across slowly to the other side, praying the current doesn't take her down or a crocodile doesn't come. She made it to the other side, and she got out and kept running, eating leaves and roots and anything she could find. Her feet began swelling, almost like that elephantitis, cracked skin, bleeding. About a week and a half later, she lost track of time. She sees a little campfire in a village off to a distance. And when she shows up, the people of the area are very aware that the youth have been kidnapped and turned into rebel soldiers. So they don't know if they're coming for help or coming to kill. But thank God, the farmer in that little village saw her coming, and she cried out in her language, which the only language she knew, I'm escaping and I need help. He took her in and bandaged her feet up and gave her something to eat and pointed to her the direction of Gulu, which was several more days by foot. She had out through the jungle and came. When she came to the town of Gulu, one day she heard the music, the drums beating in the little house I was staying in. She'd not heard music her whole life. She followed that sound and walked in the gate of her little house. She came in through the door. As she crossed the threshold, I'll never forget this day, she fell to her knees, dropped on the floor, threw her hands up and began crying. I want what's in this house. She'd never heard music, she'd never felt peace, and she never knew love. I picked her up and put my arms around her. Of course, we prayed with her. After we finished our meeting, she said, Mom, please don't make me go. I said, why not, Susan? I mean, if everybody's going. We had orphans by that time sleeping all over the house. She said, I have no place. I said, tell me your story. And she began telling me what I've just told you. I said, you can stay, Susan. One after the other, they came in and they stayed. So, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And that concludes this week's 30 Minutes program. We hope you enjoyed today's show. And, of course, we invite you to tune in again next week at this same time as we bring you topics and information of importance to our community. From all of us here at Thunderbolt Broadcasting, until we meet again next week, I'm Charles Choate.
You've been listening to 30 Minutes, a community affairs program on Thunderbolt Radio. You can listen to this broadcast and others anytime by visiting thunderboltradio.com and following the Thunderbolt Radio and Digital YouTube page. Thanks for listening.